Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hall, author of the forthcoming book, The 7 Tools of Healing.
And I'm Grace Porter. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I'm Dr. Hall's middle daughter.
Yeah. And I've been practicing integrative medicine for over 30 years. And during that time, I've become very aware of the effects that stress has on the health of my patients. So we're here today to talk about stress and what can be done about it.
Yeah, we were having a conversation earlier today about how we feel like stress is a little bit misunderstood, and it's something that we both see all the time in the office, and so we wanted to share what we've learned about stress over the years.
Yeah, studies have shown that up to 90% of doctor visits to primary care physicians are for stress-related illnesses. That's how significant this problem is. So, what do you see in your practice? You're dealing mostly with the mental health side of things.
Yeah, I see a lot of people coming in describing it as anxiety, but I think that while not all stress is anxiety, that all anxiety is stress. And when we start talking about the effects of stress in the body and on the mind, I think that that'll become apparent that people who are operating from a place of stress response a lot of the time will be operating from what we call an anxious state, or what people describe as anxiety.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense, because what stress does is it activates what we call the sympathetic side of your autonomic nervous system, and that's often called the fight or flight response.
Or freeze.
Yeah, or freeze. That's reflex that's designed to help us during times of imminent physical danger, like running from a bear.
Right, or when somebody brakes really fast in front of you and you have to slam on your brakes to avoid hitting them.
Right, or somebody swerves into your lane, or or somebody's trying to mug you or whatever.
Right, and that's a really important part of our physiological and psychological responses. It's what keeps us safe when we are in those situations. But what I see for people in my office is that they get kind of stuck in a state of that. Or we see that a lot in trauma. People get kind of stuck in their fight or flight responses, or they get kind of triggered too frequently, or kind of triggered when there's not actually a threat, when there's a perceived threat, but where there's not actually a threat. So when somebody raising their voice to you a little bit makes it feel like you're under attack, or when you're feeling overwhelmed at work, it feels like your life is going to end literally to your body, and so your body responds as if you're being chased by a bear.
Right, because your body can't tell the difference between a real physical threat and a perceived threat. It treats them both the same.
Right.
And then also you can just get in the habit of being in that fight or flight response all the time. And then that becomes the lenses through which you see the world. And so you're right, you'd be likely to interpret experiences as worst case scenario until proven otherwise. Because that's what your stress filter does, is it assumes the worst case to try to protect you until proven otherwise.
Right.
So, but
so I imagine you kind of see the medical side of things more, because people come to me when they're experiencing kind of emotional or
depression, anxiety,
or feeling overwhelmed in their life, or kind of all of those things where stress is maybe manifesting in their psychological sphere, their psyche. But I imagine people come to you mostly with physical complaints, even if the root of both of those complaints is the same. What do you see?
Right. Well, I see a lot of muscle contraction headaches, people clenching their teeth in their sleep and carrying tension in their face all day long. I see that it spreads down the neck into the shoulders, and then the digestion is probably the system that's most impacted by stress, because one of the things that happens in your body is it says, okay, I need lots of energy right now to run from this bear, and I'm going to take this energy from wherever I can get it. And when we're sitting here at rest like this, our intestines are getting up to 40% of our blood flow.
40%? That's a lot.
40%. Yeah, and your brain only gets 20%, so that tells you the relative importance, right? No. So, so that's where it's going to get most of its energy. Is it's going to steal it from your digestion and pump it into your muscles. And so a lot of digestive problems are actually stress related. So heartburn, indigestion, of course ulcers, but a lot of irritable bowel. People are coming in nowadays complaining of SIBO, the small bowel intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and I think stress is behind a lot of these different conditions. Not to mention high blood pressure, high blood sugar actually, and heart attacks, and it hasn't been proven yet, but there's a deep suspicion that the chronic stress suppresses your immune system enough that it will make you more susceptible to cancer. So some cancers may even be stress-related conditions. So
yeah, so it really impacts pretty much your whole body. And I know from previous conversations that we've had, you've talked about the impacts of stress on hormones and people's their life cycle hormones and changes in their kind of the behind the scenes stuff too.
Right. Well, and that has to do, I think a lot of that goes back to how the stress affects the intestines. One of the effects of long-term stress, and I think we need to differentiate between, short-term stress, like having to give a presentation or film something like this,
or even or even swerving when somebody kind of encroaches in your driving space.
Those stresses don't really make you sick, especially if you're able to do what they need to do. So, for example, mothers of toddlers are very busy, but they often don't get sick from their stress because they use it running after the toddler all day.
Right.
So they're using up the energy.
Well, coming from a trauma perspective, I think in a lot of some of the sensory motor trauma theories, they talk a lot about the completion of the act, and people who are unable to complete whatever reflex is being triggered in them when they experience something traumatic are the ones who are more likely to end up with post-traumatic stress, because they're kind of holding on to that urge to run away or to fight or to freeze so that they're safe and not hit and not seen. So they get kind of stuck, and then it gets kind of put on repeat. And not to say that people who are able to run away don't necessarily get post-traumatic stress, or that that everybody that doesn't does, but that's something that's been correlated. And the idea with sensory motor therapy is to kind of release the issues from the tissues, so to speak, that urge to complete that reflex is in the very cells of the body, and when they complete that cycle, that sometimes the symptoms will go away.
Right. That's a good. We use that same work in the craniosacral therapy, but we call it completion of biological process. Yeah. So if things are left unfinished. So if your body's ready to run or fight, and you're sitting in this little cubicle,
right?
It's like your body's
where does that energy go? What does it do?
Holding the bag, exactly.
Right.
And that's when it just builds up this tension, and and sometimes it comes out as violence in the workplace. There's a lot of reports of people who have lost it at work and hit a coworker or yelled or screamed or thrown something, and that's because things get all bottled up until something has to give.
Comes out sideways.
Yeah. So so one way that you know that you're stressed is you're experiencing some of these symptoms that happen when too much of your life energy is going into this whole stress response. Right. So muscle contraction, headaches, like I say, clenching your teeth in your sleep, not having trouble falling asleep, or
staying asleep,
waking up and not being able to fall back asleep, restless legs. So what happens, just to get back to what we talked about a second ago, one of the things that happens with long-term stress is that your intestines become hyperpermeable, or what we call leaky gut. So increased permeability, and that overwhelms the liver with toxins from your digestion, and then it can't balance your hormones very well. And so a lot of times women will get PMS. And then it also can't balance your blood sugar very well, and a lot of people get hypoglycemic symptoms. Now, stress also has a direct effect on your sex hormones. And the body figures, well, if we're in a really stressful situation, I don't want to bring a baby into that. So it really cuts down on fertility. Long enough, it can even cut down male fertility. But it seems to affect women's cycles a lot. If women get stressed enough, they'll even just stop having periods.
That's true.
And that's just, again, the body having this protective mechanism built in. So another issue that I don't see talked about much in our society is that so the acute stress response, or the instantaneous stress response, is to help you survive a physical threat. But if you get stressed and stay stressed, after about 3 or 4 weeks, you cross over physiologically into what we call the chronic stress response. And that's not the same as a fight, flight, or freeze response. What the chronic stress response is designed to help you survive famine. And so what happens is your physiology changes, your metabolic rate changes, and your body tries to hold on to every calorie as if your very life depended on it. So what you see is you're going along minding your own business, not changing how you eat, not changing how you exercise, and suddenly your weight starts going up. And this is a very common experience in a lot of people. And so then when your weight starts going up, what's the first thing you do?
Get stressed out.
Well, yeah, but you go on a diet, right? And what does your body experience when you go on a diet?
Stress.
Famine, right? And so then it says, see, I told you it is famine, and it'll redouble its efforts to hold on to the calories, and then you end up doing that yo-yo thing, which a lot of people experience. So most diet programs don't actually work very well until you can get yourself out of that chronic stress response, because otherwise it's just, your weight's just going to come back on. So as a good example, if you look at how many calories your body burns in a day just to run the cells, just to be alive, and then let's say you went into the gym and exercised as hard as you could for 3 hours, how many extra calories would you burn above your basic metabolic rate?
So like a couple hundred or something.
What's like 3 to 5%. So if your metabolism dropped down by even just 5%, you physically could not exercise enough to make up the difference. And so that's why exercise alone doesn't usually work when you're in a chronic stress response. And then if you over-exercise,
creates more stress in the system.
Creates more stress, exactly. And so whereas moderate exercise is found to be a stress reliever, over-exercise is just an additional stress to your system. And where that line is very individualized. You have to find that for yourself. But so I think a lot of times when people are working on weight issues, they're not talking about stress, and that's one of the reasons that the weight programs don't work very well. So that's what I do in my practice, is help them get out of that chronic stress response, and then often their weight, whatever they do then to maintain the weight, starts to work better.
Yeah, and I think that it's not just weight loss that improves when you get out of that chronic stress response either, because it kind of goes into how we behave in our interpersonal relationships, and it goes into how we feel about ourselves, and it goes into our mood, and all of these other issues that are also present in our lives most of the time.
Right, because when you're stressed, you tend to have a shorter fuse. You get irritated a lot more easily, and that can affect your relationships, right? And it also affects your memory, your short-term memory. Things just don't get filed away right,
and your cognitive thinking.
So that all has effects on your relationships. So
that's actually something that we talk about in regards to chronic traumatic situations. So kind of has the terrible name of battered woman syndrome, but we're talking about people who are in situations where their acute stress response gets triggered over and over and over again for years, where the quantity of cortisol that's in the system over the course of years is enough to create damage in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, where the decision making and the rational thought happens. happens.
Same could happen if you're living
in a war zone
or gangs or
in a gang territory or
right.
kind of anywhere where there's that intense, prolonged, and maybe sporadic, like unpredictable stress.
So basically, the way we're designed, I mean, this stress response has been so effective that it goes way back. I mean, chickens have a stress response, and they're related to dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And I think even amoebas have been shown to have their own version of a stress response. So this stress response is hardwired into our bodies. And
thank goodness, because if I had to think about what I needed to do when somebody hits the brakes in front of me, I would have died a long time ago.
Exactly. So it's very handy, but and you have it when you need it. You can't really talk yourself out of it. But the trouble we have nowadays is we're living in the stress response and staying in that stress physiology, and we can't stay healthy and stay in that stress physiology at the same time. So, and if you look at most people's lives, they actually are in similar situations over and over again almost every day.
Yeah.
So ideally, you want to be able to face the vast majority of what you have to deal with every day without triggering that fight or flight response. And in fact, that's my definition of stress. Actually, I like the pragmatic thing. So my definition of stress is whatever that triggers that fight or flight response in your system.
Right. So any situation or anticipated or even perceived situation that triggers your stress response.
Yeah, perceptions are really important. So so it's anytime you perceive yourself to be threatened, or you perceive yourself to be overwhelmed or spread too thin. Those are the two triggers that will tell your adrenal glands to release cortisol and adrenaline. And the thing about adrenaline is it's very short-lived. It's gone within a few minutes.
Right.
And that's what
and that's like the prickly on the arms and like the
increased heart rate, the sweaty, the pit in your stomach, but the cortisol stays in your system for over 3 hours.
So if you think about if you're stressed all throughout the day, then the cortisol would never really leave your system.
Right.
Because it'd be reintroduced and reintroduced and reintroduced.
And it only takes 2 or 3 of those times of feeling overwhelmed during the day to stay in that stress physiology the whole day. And that's when you're going to start getting the physiological effects of stress and the deeper psychological effects.
And we don't have we don't have unending reserves of cortisol, right? What happens when we're wearing our adrenals down like that?
Well, if the adrenals get completely worn out, or somewhat worn out, that's a condition called adrenal fatigue. That's not well recognized in conventional medicine because for some weird reason, conventional medicine ignores your adrenal glands unless you're all the way like Addisonian where you have no adrenal glands, or Cushingoid where you have a tumor making too much cortisol all the time. But anything in between they seem to ignore. And I found in my integrative medicine practice that paying attention to adrenal fatigue has helped probably more of my patients than almost anything else I learned in medical school.
Right.
And so you're right. So what happens is sometimes the cortisol stays too high, which like if it's high at night when you're trying to sleep, you never get into that deep restful sleep.
And that's where your body regenerates. That's where when you're really in the REM sleep is where you're really getting the...
So a common symptom of adrenal fatigue is what we call non-restorative sleep. If you wake up just as tired as you were when you went to bed, there's a chance.
Or if you're sleeping 10, 12 hours and still tired when you wake up.
Still tired, yeah. So those are clues that you might have adrenal fatigue. But we can test for it. So I think the reason that medicine ignores adrenal glands is when that cortisol goes into your blood, 99% of it gets bound to a protein. So only about 1% is actually affecting the cells. So that 1% can change a lot, but your blood test might not change at all, right? Or that blood test might change a lot, and that 1% might not change much. So blood tests for cortisol are not very sensitive.
Which is why you do the saliva,
Exactly. So the salivary glands sort of skim off that 1%, and it's only the 1% that gets into the saliva. So by measuring the cortisol in your saliva, we can get a good idea of the active level of cortisol. And what we see is your cortisol goes through a 24-hour cycle. So it's generally really low at night, so your cells have some R&R and get to rest. And then right before you wake up, it tends to spike up fairly high, and that's to get your cells all woken up and ready to work. And then it sort of level out through the day, and then you're supposed to turn off at night. So that's like a normal cortisol curve.
Which is part of why when we're talking about sleep hygiene and we say turn off the screens a few hours before bed, that's because a lot of the the fast-paced things that on screens, or if you're watching a violent movie or those sorts of things, can become so stimulating to your system
that it's hard to turn off.
But it's hard to relax the cortisol down. As part of it.
Exactly.
There's also the light in your eyes and all that stuff.
Right, and but that can be tested for now, and then there's treatment. So some people come in and their cortisol lines are just flatlined across the bottom, and those are people that are really exhausted usually. So, and one way you can tell is if you consistently get lightheaded when you stand up, or if you stand up and your heart rate goes up more than 10 points or something, that's a clue that you don't have enough cortisol to even support your system. So
cortisol in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's just when we're kind of stuck in that stress response where it becomes an issue.
Right. But cortisol is the exact same as prednisone, except it's not as potent. It's about 1/7 as potent as prednisone. But it has the same effects in your body. It'll give you diabetes, it'll give you osteoporosis, it affects your muscles. It has all these the same effects as cortisol. It makes you gain fat in the middle and get skinny on your arms and legs. But your body has a backup called DHEA, and that's another adrenal hormone. And normally they are secreted together. So when your cortisol goes up, your DHEA, and then I think about cortisol and DHEA kind of like spray paint and a stencil. So the stencil says to the spray paint, you can go here, but you can't go here. And so what happens if the spray paint's going and you reach up and pull the stencil out of the way?
It goes everywhere.
Yeah. So one of the first things that happens with adrenal fatigue is your DHEA drops, because your adrenal glands can't keep making high levels of both cortisol and DHEA, and it's the cortisol that's keeping you alive. So the DHEA starts to drop, and that's when the cortisol starts really affecting you, because the DHEA is not protecting your B lymphocytes and your insulin and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, sometimes when people have a lot of adrenal fatigue, they kind of look like somebody who's been taking prednisone for that reason. And but there's treatment for that. There's testing and there's treatment. If you're having any of those kind of symptoms, like the non-restorative sleep and lightheaded when you stand up, bad PMS, bad hypoglycemia, any of those kinds of things.
Yeah. So we got super technical.
Sorry about that.
He gets really excited about this stuff. We both do, but
I didn't even talk about secretory IgA. No.
Yeah, so I think we were kind of talking about some of the deeper things that you might not notice, but I think one thing that I'm aware of in regards to stress with my clients sometimes is that they may not even be aware that they're feeling stress. So I was thinking we could talk a little bit about how you even know that you're feeling stressed when you're going about your day-to-day business.
Well, the first thing you have to do is listen to yourself. You have to take a second and tune in and see what you're experiencing
in your body, what you're experiencing in your mind.
Right. And if you're so used to just being tuned out, you'll miss the messages. So that's the first step, is to take.
Especially, I think, if the messages are there all the time, right? Like if you're constantly in a state of stress, it might just seem like
this is me,
your normal state, right?
Right. But again, like we said, you can't stay there and stay healthy at the same time. Right. So
we talked about the muscle tension and the headaches.
Yeah.
I think when I feel stressed, I feel like a knot in my chest, or like I'm having trouble breathing, or I'm holding my breath.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens, the long-term stress leads to premature aging, and the DHEA helps you preserve the elastic tissue in your skin, and so if you're running on low DHEA, you get more wrinkles. And
But if we're talking about it's Tuesday, it's 2 p.m., how do I know whether I'm stressed or not? What might I be experiencing in my body or mind that would tell me in that moment that I'm experiencing stress in that moment?
any of these symptoms, anxiety, that pit in your stomach, that knot.
So racing mind, when you say anxiety, let's kind of talk about what that might mean and what that might feel like, because I think that's kind of a term that everyone uses to describe their own experience of all kinds of things.
It's kind of like you want to crawl out of your skin. It's intolerable to even to stay.
So a little antsy.
Yeah, antsy.
Racing mind, or your mind really focusing in on one thing kind of in a intense
Obsessively,
way.
or not being able to concentrate at all.
Feeling really fuzzy.
Yeah, and
like any thought is kind of a moving target and you can't quite find it.
yeah, and they call that brain fog, and that's another symptom of increased intestinal permeability. So that's another clue if you're having, and especially if it comes and goes. Sometimes you're really clear and sharp, and sometimes you're really foggy. That's a clue things are going on. But yeah, in that moment, usually your heart rate will go up because of the adrenaline. You'll feel more tension in your neck and shoulders generally.
And sometimes actually elsewhere too. I know for myself, when my thighs start clenching, then I know that I'm feeling anxiety, because that's like my whole body is bracing against something.
Yeah,
and that's like my whole body is ready to run, or my whole body is ready to fight off the tiger.
Mine goes to my lower back. It gets all tight. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first part is just tuning in, listening to your body, noticing how you feel when you're relaxed, and then noticing how you feel when things are hectic, and you'll be able to figure this out. But one of the, stress has gotten so common now, where over 50% of people describe themselves as chronically stressed, that I think our society's starting to respond in some ways that are counterproductive. Like one way, they don't even want to use the word stress anymore.
Work-life balance.
They want to call it work-life balance. And the problem with that is that doesn't change how it's affecting your body. Whether you call it stress or work-life balance, it's still having the same effect on your digestion and your immune system and everything else. So trying to sweep it under the carpet doesn't help.
No.
And there's another, like, a lot of businesses are now having that attitude at work that if you admit to being stressed out, then you're weak, or you're wimp or whatever, and that's counterproductive, because then you're not going to get the help you need until you crash.
Right.
And I'm much more interested in preventative medicine than treating crises. And if we can prevent the crisis, that's much better.
Good.
So learning how to be healthy with potential stressors, because technically nothing outside your skin is stress. It's only stress if it triggers that fight or flight response. But learning how to be, to stay in your power even when you're in a situation you don't have any control over, that's a great skill to have to stay healthy in today's society. Because you don't have a lot of power if you're an employee at somewhere. You don't have a lot of power over the weather or the traffic or the EMFs you're exposed to,
or how other people behave, or what they say to you,
treat you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So most of our day-to-day things we don't really have that much control over. So we have to learn how to stay healthy in those situations, because if they make you sick, you've just given your power over to that situation. And there are ways to stay healthy even in the face of pretty immense potential stressors. I mean, people were able to stay healthy even in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
So if they could do it, then I think we could do it. So, and that's what we're about here at the 7 Tools is, one of the things we can use the 7 Tools for is to treat stress. It's good for a lot of other things too, but.
Yeah, but I think, when we're talking about stress this way, if we're wanting to prevent our stress response from getting triggered in the first place, we have to make it so that all of those things that are happening in our outside life, all of the potential stressors, don't become stress, and the way that happens is through that changing the perception. And
Right.
Something that I talk about with my clients, but it's also something that when I'm teaching in the Taming the Bear class, I can use this example of when somebody smiles at you, that something as benign as a smile can be seen as validation if that's your belief structure, that that you're okay is the basis of your belief structure. But that same benign smile might also be a threat that triggers your stress response if the kind of the way that smile is perceived or is taken into your system is as a threat. And there's a lot of beliefs that can go into creating that sense of that smile being a threat, even though it's just a smile, and it might not even be related to you at all. It's just like something that's happening outside of yourself.
They might have just gotten a funny text or something.
Yeah, sloth videos. I smile about sloth videos.
Well, that's better than cat videos. But that's right. You held a sloth when you were in Brazil, right?
The best. I love sloths.
That's pretty cool. So I don't think I've ever seen one except in the zoo.
They're so soft. Speaking of perceptions, sloths are really soft. They look so coarse. They are so soft.
Really? I thought they had been coarse. Anyway, so much about sloths and slothful living and
rabbit holes. Yeah.
But
they're actually a good stress analogy in that what their main food is actually poisonous to their system, and they've figured out a way to eat these poisonous food where they're able to get the nutrients and not the toxins from it. So we can adapt to all sorts of things.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think stress has been a major motivator for adaptation for hundreds of millions of years. And this fight or flight response was an adaptation to the old jungle, and now we've got this new jungle that we're living in. And
it's not working very well anymore.
But I think this epidemic of stress-related illnesses is asking us to adapt to this new environment. And in the old environment, we adapted by, most animals adapted by increasing their physicality, getting stronger, getting bigger claws, whatever. Humans adapted by socializing and working together because we don't have big claws and teeth. And what I think this new epidemic of stress is asking us to do is to evolve our consciousness, because it's only through evolving our consciousness that we're going to survive all this stress. And part of the stress epidemic is the rate of infertility nowadays, for example. It's not just pesticides and herbicides, and then there's all the heart attacks and a lot of strokes and diabetes and weight issues. So many of these things point back to stress, and we've got to figure this out, or we're not going to survive in this jungle.
Yeah, well, I think weight is actually a great example of that, because there is all this talk about the illness is weight related, or you have to get your weight to be a certain state. But there's health in every size, so it's not about like the size of your actual body so much as how well your body is functioning, and that you can be all kinds of sizes and have your body be functioning well when you're healthy with your stress, or when you're healthy with your emotions, when you're healthy with what you're eating, when you're healthy with all of these pieces. It's not about a number on a scale so much as it is about how we're interacting with the world.
Exactly. And I have some pretty thin patients with high blood pressure, diabetes, all that stuff. And I have some really heavy patients that don't have any of that. So that's a really good observation.
But we're kind of having the wrong conversation, I think.
Yeah. So what do you do to help your patients with stress, or your clients?
Kind of the buzzword these days, I think, is mindfulness, and that's definitely a piece of it, is learning how to be aware of what is in any given moment, and being able to kind of name it and take it outside of themselves a little bit, because oftentimes I think when we are able to acknowledge what is and kind of take it outside of ourselves, it in yoga they can talk about like we are not our thoughts, right? Like we're the sky and the thoughts pass through, and so you're kind of able to take it outside of yourself enough to disidentify with it,
and then you can look at it
and see where it came from, and see what purpose it's serving in your life, when it started, and asking questions. A lot of when was the first time you experienced this, and or what comes up for you when you think about this, or where do you feel that in your body when you're talking about this? Because oftentimes people are bringing in stories from their life, or they're bringing in kind of their own interpretation of the events of their lives. And so for me, there's often kind of that bringing back in the body aspect, because we can't separate ourselves. We are our body, mind, spirit. We are one within ourselves, and when we experience something on one aspect of ourselves, we're going to experience it in the other aspects of ourselves, and so we're able to kind of connect that experience between how I felt when the lady cut in front of me at the grocery store with the physical feeling that I'm feeling when I'm talking about it, and kind of what the root of that is, because I'm not really upset that she cut in front of me so much as that triggered something old for me, and so
I would be pretty upset.
But upset a little bit, like that's kind of the annoyance where you're like, hey, that's rude.
Yeah.
Right? But like
That's
upset
unjust.
enough to really need to be processing it and talking about it with your therapist. I mean, there's kind of like this threshold of things that come in through the door.
Into
right? Like when I'm paying for this time, what am I going to talk about? So when people are bringing in a story like that, it's not really about that story, it's about something else.
That's
so
true.
kind of really honoring the whole experience of it, and kind of knowing that we don't have reactions for no reason. We operate within our own story, our own perceptions, our own experiences, and so when there's something that's up, there's usually a reason why it's up. And I always tell people that I have a lot of faith that they'll talk about the things that they need to talk about, or that what needs to come into the room will come into the room, because it does.
It does.
And we work on things from all kinds of angles all the time, but it's really, I think, about reconnecting to that inner knowing of themselves, and the realization that they are safe, that they are okay, that they are
So you use a lot of mindfulness
loving and lovable
in helping a person to become aware of what their truth is right now.
Yeah.
Like what's really behind this feeling.
Yeah.
Because feelings are just messengers.
Yes.
They're often not the message.
No,
They're the
James
messenger.
Hillman says that symptoms are messages from our soul, which I really like that quote, because it's kind of this connects in, if we think about our soul as kind of that inner knowing, or that
Inner wisdom.
kind of true part of ourselves that exists before and after our mind.
And I think of it that way. I think, if you're having a symptom, that's a clue that something somewhere in
It's
you
off.
is out of balance, right? And this inner knowing, this inner wisdom that runs your body can detect that imbalance, and it knows it's there. And then if it can't take care of it itself, which it tries to, obviously, then it will create a symptom to get your attention to help correct the imbalance. Now, what we do in medicine mostly is attack that symptom and try to make the symptom go away. We don't often
a lot of mental health does that also.
We don't often say, okay, well, what is the imbalance causing the symptom? In other words, your high blood pressure is not the cause of your high blood pressure, right? Your high blood sugar is not the cause of your high blood sugar. Those are symptoms. So right, and I think the body is like a mouthpiece or a spokesperson for that in wisdom. So I would agree with.
Yeah, and I think we talk about and Hillman talks about that in relation to mental health symptoms. Like when you're feeling anxiety, or when you're feeling depression, all of that is just some part of yourself trying to get your attention. It's like kind of standing up in the corner and yelling, "Hey, over here, look at me!"
And the way I help my patients work with their feelings, the same techniques can be used whether it's a physical feeling or an emotional feeling, because the mind and the body are just two sides of the same coin. They're not separate things that are connected. So I don't even talk about mind-body connection anymore. But they're just two ways of looking at the same same thing. What Spinoza called the divine mystery or divine substance. So so the same skill sets that you use to treat your anxiety can also be used to treat your knee pain or your back pain or your headache or
actually, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your practice as well, or from the flip side of it, of that I have had so many clients who are coming in and they have health issues also. And when they really make those internal changes, all of a sudden the IBS isn't a problem anymore. Or, when they go in and something I do a lot is kind of like dialoguing with the symptom, kind of talking to the headache, talking to the hives, talking to the eye twitch, talking to the whatever it is that might be kind of physically present for somebody. Talking to that ball in the stomach and kind of asking it, like, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to hear? Or what do you need me to hear?
What do you think your job is?
Yeah. What do I need to know about this? But as they can do, even in a longer term setting, as they do those internal changes, the physical symptoms abate, because I think in some ways we're much more attuned to listening to physical symptoms than we are, because we're used to going to the doctor. We're used to getting a Band-Aid when we're cut. We're kind of used to attending to our body in that way. So even sometimes when the imbalance is maybe originating in the mental sphere, it will manifest itself in the physical sphere, because it's trying to get our attention, is trying to...
Well, the most common imbalances that I find in my patients, I call them belief imbalances. So, and they are expressing physically, but you're right, that chasing on the physical level rarely finds the real cause, unless they're somebody sneaking them arsenic or something, or they have carbon monoxide leak in their home or something. Those are pretty rare compared to all the other things that we deal with. So that was actually one of my first professional crises I went through as I was transitioning from conventional medicine to this what I call integral medicine, is realizing that the real healers in our society are the therapists, because they're helping people find out who they really are. And that was the definition of healing that I found, is that it's it's finding out who you really are and then living in a way that's true to that.
Coming home.
That's what healing is. And then the body will respond when the imbalances get corrected. And so I had to figure out a way to still preserve my medical training and medical degree. Exactly. And so people usually come in for the physical causes, and then can transition them over to saying, okay, what's at the real root of this? Because all these physical treatments aren't working very well, or they're only treating the symptom. They're not getting your blood pressure to go down. So looks like we're just about out of time. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I don't know.
Well, I'd like to say there's hope for stress.
Oh, there's definitely hope for stress.
Because you can figure out what the real root is inside of you, and you can figure out the root of your perceptions, so that when you face the vast majority of what you have to face in a day, it won't trigger that fight or flight response, because it's triggered by your perception more than the reality.
Yeah, it is.
So please take a look at our website, 7tools.com, and see what you think. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, check out our classes. We teach classes on kind of the mechanism or the process of examining and changing, or maybe examining is not even the right word, kind of reconnecting to and changing the beliefs that we're holding all the time. And
what's the name of the class?
We teach a class called Taming the Bear, Taking the Bite Out of Stress.
That does exactly that.
It does exactly that, and I have seen it just create amazing transformation for people.
Same here.